So with us today, we have several guest speakers. We have Betsy Suver, who is with the Department of Job and Family Services. And she is basically our P-EBT guru for the Department of Job and Family Services. She's going to go over some of the updates on this round of P-EBT, what things have changed, how children and schools are eligible. And then I'm going to talk about, and I'm Bridget Hires. I am the Child Nutrition Program Manager for the Office of Integrated Student Supports here at ODE. I'm going to be talking about some of the common questions that we're getting from schools and some of the resources that ODE has available. And then we'll welcome Missy Balball. She's with Management Council. She is helping to coordinate the data collection process. So all of the schools will be reporting through a secure P-EBT link. And Missy is over that process, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the data collection, how it's going to get to Job and Family Services, and some information that you need to know about that process. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Betsy Suver from Job and Family Services to start us off in our presentation. Betsy.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you. I understand there is probably a lot of confusion about the new P-EBT rules or changes. I understand because every time we do this, FNS or the federal law changes the requirements for it. So we always have to circle back and start at like ground zero. And then even when we got this current round of rules, it really took a couple meetings with our federal partners, Food and Nutrition Services at the Department of Agriculture, to understand exactly everything that was being said. So I understand if you have questions too, that is completely understandable. And so the first thing that is different this time is last two rounds, the school had to be closed for 5 consecutive days, and closed meant that was not open for in-person instruction for 5 consecutive days. What they have done now to open it up to, well, let me step back for a second. So in the August and September round, a hybrid schedule that had 5 consecutive days of in-person instruction for the students qualified. But then you had other schools with a hybrid schedule that was like maybe every other day the children would remote learn or be in person, and that disqualified the child from P-EBT. In order to rectify that and make it open to more children, the law passed in October. I'm sorry, there have been so many law passages in the past few months, I've forgotten the name, but they've opened it up to more hybrid schools by saying closed or has been operating with reduced attendance or hours. And that reduced attendance or hours is where you get your hybrid schedules that can be included now, coming every other day or only 2 days a week, and the other 3 are at home. So it offered a lot more flexibility. It's just the wording that they use just, causes, I think, confusion. So if they see reduced attendance as only half your kids come one day and the other half come the other day, that's what a reduced attendance is. Your Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, those sort of examples. The reduced hours are if some schools are operating like half the school comes from like 8 to 11 and the other come from 1 to 4, that would be reduced hours. And along with that is that no students are receiving a free or reduced meal at school to be consumed at school. So that's the first condition for P-EBT eligibility. Does the school have a non-standard schedule that has been operating for at least 5 consecutive days? So if you have been doing that since August, you met that criteria back in August, and then now you just have to figure out the child eligibility. Or if you were in person and then started in October having a a non-standard schedule, that's what I'm going to call it, you would start, your school eligibility starts in October. And again, so it's kind of two criteria for the school. You have a non-standard schedule and you are not offering the food to be eaten at school. So your grab and go meals to be consumed at home, that does not count as being offered in the school to eat at school. So once you have school eligibility, you then have to check for the child eligibility. Would they have received a free or reduced meal under the National School Lunch Program or the school breakfast program, if not for the health emergency? So we know that, you know, there's now the free meals for all students. You know, the applications weren't necessarily happening, but Bridget will go into that about how you determine that eligibility. So Bridget, if you want to move to the, yep, thank you. So examples of eligible school status is, you know, if you have been fully remote learning, the hybrid schedules that I gave you examples of, you know, remote learning Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and in-person Tuesday, Thursday, or you do 1 week on, 1 week off of remote learning versus in-person. Some schools may be fully in-person with the option of families to choose attending fully remote, the virtual academies. That meets the school criteria because you have that kind of non-standard option. And then the only other strange caveat that FNS put out there for school eligibility first is when children are having to be quarantined for at least 5 consecutive days, that can meet the school eligibility, even though you may be fully in person. So that's just that weird outlier school eligible status. And Bridget will go to the next slide. So I just kind of wanted to summarize this again because I know it was a lot of words on the first slide. So it's your school eligibility first. Are you operating a non-standard schedule because of COVID? And then as a result, your meals are not provided to eat at school. So once you have met that, you then look down to the child. Are they eligible for free and reduced price meals? Bridget, if you want to go, yep, thank you. Once you have determined those two things, you have to figure out what days count in their P-EBT eligibility. So it's the days that they do not attend school in person and do not get a meal. So if they're fully remote learning, and that includes days of the week where you would, let me give an example. I know there was one school district that was remote learning Monday, Tuesday, no instruction at all on Wednesdays, and then Thursday and Friday remote learning. That Wednesday of no instruction counts, so all 5 days would be included because that Wednesday off of school was part of this non-standard schedule due to COVID. If COVID was not happening and you would be coming to school Monday through Friday, that would be your standard schedule. And I'm sorry if I'm going too much into the weeds and confusing you. I'm trying not to do that. Another example is attending the school in person, but they do not receive the meal at school to eat at school. So again, if you have children coming for instruction at the school for 3 hours, and they are given a bag of food to take home to eat, that can count as a day for P-EBT eligibility. But if they are consuming food at the school, that will not be able to count as P-EBT.
What if they have breakfast at school and take the grab-and-go lunch?
So if they're receiving any meal at school, it cannot, to eat at school, then that does not count for P-EBT eligibility. So if they're receiving any meal to be consumed at school, that throws them out of the P-EBT for the day. The other days are included are the quarantine days for more than 5 consecutive days. We did have a question about this, about, well, what if we don't know the quarantine days? You may not know, a family may not report it and just say, my child's not coming to school this day. But if you are aware that a child is being quarantined because maybe it was prompted by the school that the child be quarantined, that's when you would include that. We understand there are going to be situations where you're just not going to know. And the other thing that FNS has clarified is that snow days, where the school decides to switch to fully remote learning on that day, those days can count as well. Bridget? Days that do not count are your weekends, the holidays, scheduled school breaks, and days off not related to COVID. So Christmas, spring break, your teacher in-service days, or if I'm just thinking an example of, for my children, when the teachers have parent-teacher conferences, we typically have a day off the following week to kind of compensate for that time spent doing parent-teacher conferences. That's not related to COVID as well. And then the snow days, where no instruction is occurring either remotely or in person. So if it's just, you're calling it a day, nothing's happening, those don't count for P-EBT. And then again, any day a child is in school and receiving a meal, breakfast or lunch, to eat at school, the day will not count for P-EBT eligibility. Sorry, I was taking a look at some of the questions. So if the day is a snow day and no education was offered remotely, then it doesn't count, correct? And, oh, they're coming fast. But maybe, Bridget, I think we had talked about, resources for families. We have, sorry, I forgot I had one other slide. The Ohio Association of Food Banks has worked with us to put up a website in the first round of P-EBT that we did back in the spring to just get information out there to individuals while we were working to get ours up and running. And so on our website, we have the flyer that can be sent to families. We have a question and answers for families, and then we have what's called a P-EBT card buck slip. It's instructions how to use the P-EBT card and how to like pin it, just like you would receive with like a credit card. All of these documents are being translated into 6 other languages: Spanish, Somali, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, and French. Once those have been finished translating, we will post those to our website as well. Bridget, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Good deal. And then just as a reminder for those of you who might have logged in a little bit later, we are collecting the questions in the chat. So thank you very much. You guys are asking awesome questions in the chat. We're going to have all 3 speakers go ahead and go through their information, and then we'll be looking through the chat and answering your questions. We have, oh my gosh, over 340 people on this webinar. So unfortunately, we can't have people unmuting themselves and so forth, but absolutely be putting your questions in the chat, and we will get to those here in just a little bit. So the things I wanted to cover was some resources for the Ohio Department of Education. We have a question and answer guide, and quite a few of the questions that you all are asking, you might find actually that this question and answer guide does have your answers to it. And the cool thing is it's right there in writing, and you can show those folks in your district of your various questions. So obviously, this link is pretty lofty to be writing down. We are going to make a copy of the recorded presentation and these PowerPoint slides available in the secure P-EBT portal link that Management Council sent out and that your district will be using to submit your data. So don't feel like you have to furiously be writing down everything. We will make these resources available. However, I find that in order to find this Q&A, instead of having to type in all of this, one thing you might be able to do is just simply go to the ODE webpage. And once you're there, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a search box. And if you type in pandemic electronic, you can probably even just put in pandemic. But if you put those two words in, I did notice that the very first thing that pops up on the search is the Q&A that we've prepared for schools. And we did it in the lens of schools. JFS, Betsy was just talking about some of the resources they have available for the lens of the parent or the household to explain P-EBT. We did it more of what schools would need to know for P-EBT. And some common questions that, again, will be covered in that Q&A is we do get a lot of questions if the district has been offering pickup meals or remote learning meals, to-go meals. Maybe you've been doing home delivery or bus stop delivery. Will that still count? And the answer is yes. You can still continue to do that as a district and offer those pickup meals for the children that are doing remote education, and those children are still qualified for P-EBT. It really comes down to the fact that a child is not eligible for P-EBT on any days they actually go into their school building and they're offered a meal at school to eat at school. I noticed some questions of the chat was asking, well, what if some kids go into school and get a meal in school and some kids are home and get a to-go meal? Can you count those days? What I want to make sure everybody sort of understands is that each child might actually have a different count of P-EBT days, and it's going to be based on their schedule. So if you have hybrid learning students, like Betsy was talking about, where Group A goes Monday and Wednesday and Group B goes Tuesday and Thursday to school, and then they switch Fridays, what you'll do is figure out for your free and reduced students who is in Group A, who is in Group B, how many days were they remote education for that month, and that's what you can report for any given student. So it's not going to be like the spring where everybody's going to get the same amount of money. You truly can have different students getting different amounts of money because they will have different remote education days, or they'll have different instruction day counts for days that they weren't in the building getting a meal in the building. So we know that's a little bit more difficult, but it really is going to be determined by the student. Again, you can do it based on set schedule though, and you don't have to track attendance. We get that question a lot. So it can be based on, again, the Group A schedule and the Group B schedule and what the child would have had of remote education days for that month, as opposed to figuring out did they actually log on or not. So the answer is for that very first one, again, you can be doing those to-go meals, and the children still could qualify for your free and reduced students can still qualify for P-EBT for the remote education days. As Betsy had mentioned, the weekends, holiday breaks, and calamity days where there's no instruction do not count for P-EBT. So if your district called a snow day, Monday was a very icy day, and my children's district just did a 2-hour delay, that still is considered an instruction day. If they call it a complete no school day, calamity day, and no instruction remotely was happening, you cannot count that day. So again, P-EBT may not be counted for any in-person days where the meal is offered in school. And in parentheses, I have related to the question in the Q&A that is affiliated with. So the question was just raised, if a child is absent from remote learning, you don't have to track absences. You can do it based on their scheduled number of days in school is totally fine. You don't have to track did the child actually log on their remote learning day. You can still submit them for P-EBT. We're getting a lot of questions about preschool. So preschool can actually be included for this round of P-EBT. And in all of these, you can actually go back to the first day of school or August 1st, whichever was later. So if based on this new instruction, especially with the hybrid students, which were not approved back when we did the first data collection for this school year in August, September, but now are, when you submit your data, you can actually submit the data, and we want you to submit the data for all free and reduced students for the whole school year. Even though you might have already submitted for August, September for your students, go ahead and submit for those students again for the number of days. And what will happen is if it's the same amount of days that you reported before, the system will just say, you know what, they've already been paid out for that, it's fine, we're not going to pay them again. But if students should have gotten more days based on this hybrid instruction, or you're adding kids for August, September, it's totally fine. That's what we want you to do. And Missy will talk a little bit more about the different data collection months that we're collecting for this round. So for preschool students, though, you only want to include the preschool students if you would have been serving them breakfast and lunch under the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program, offering those meals to the preschool students. If the preschool students would have been given the special milk program, or maybe been on child and adult care food program, we're not collecting that information for this round. We're actually waiting for USDA to give us some more instruction about especially child and adult care food program. So only include your preschool if you would have been servicing them under the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. So as Betsy had mentioned, quarantine days can be counted. And the question on this is, so basically, let's say you have that hybrid student that was supposed to be in person on Monday and Wednesday, but they had to quarantine. What this is allowing you to do is to provide P-EBT benefits for additional days that their set schedule wouldn't have had them on because they had to quarantine. Now, if you have no way to track quarantining, you can't just assume that if a child was absent from school that they were quarantining. You have to have some sort of documentation to support that the child was quarantining. So if you had that, certainly you can add those count of quarantine days to their P-EBT count of days they should have. If there's really no way that your district can track that or track that now, what I would suggest is absolutely just submit for the students for the number of days you know. There will be additional data collection rounds that if you find that you underreported for a student because you did not include their quarantine days, we will have the ability for you to update that record and for the child to receive the additional days of benefits. Another question we get is students of high school grade. Basically, if a child is over 18, can they no longer get the P-EBT? And the NSLP regulations actually allow children who are high school grade. It doesn't have an age for the National School Lunch Program. Some of our other programs do, but the National School Lunch Program does not. It says high school grade. So if you have a child that's 19, 20, or in a specialized program, it can actually go up to 22. That a child is still enrolled in the district and working towards that high school diploma, then you can actually include them in P-EBT if they are either qualified for free or reduced benefits, or if they reside in a CEP or P2 building. Okay. And then we are getting a lot of questions about withdrawn students. So we do actively encourage you all to submit for P-EBT for your withdrawn students. Again, your free and reduced students, and what you'll submit is for the first day of school or August 1st, whichever's later, up to the date of withdrawal. So if they withdrew in, say, October, you would submit for August, September, and October days, and then you would just submit for 0 days for November and December. And then if another district, if they've now enrolled in another district, then that district will submit for the November, December days. And we kind of have that on our radar that we want to work that out. I know a lot of people are concerned about that they might not have the most updated address for the students that have since withdrawn. And we just want you to, as much as possible, just use the most current address that you have on record. If the cards do come back to JFS, then the households will be able to call into the JFS line and update their address, or we'll try to figure out, how we can get that benefit to them. The question was raised about the grade level 23 students. You can include them if they're free and reduced and they are enrolled in your district. Then you can include them as for P-EBT. Okay. So those are the common questions that ODE is getting, and now I'm going to turn it over to Missy Balbal. She is with Management Council, and she's going to talk more about the P-EBT data collection. Missy.
Thanks, Bridget. So we'll go ahead and advance the slide. So one of the common questions about data is, do I leave data in for previous months? Do I have to have a 0? Can I leave it blank if they didn't have eligibility? If a student isn't eligible for a given month or didn't have any qualifying days, you can leave that blank, or you can enter a 0. Either is acceptable. One thing that you do need to be aware of is that we will not be allowing or loading data for months that are not in the current collection. So right now what we're collecting is August through December. And if you happen to have any values in the January column in the template, those values will not be loaded, and they do not get stored for the collection in March when those are expected to be submitted. Student address is a required field. We can't accept records that don't have a student address. So what we have told districts is that if you have a child who is homeless or you have no address on file, if the district would want to and actually get the benefits, you can use the district address. The district would then receive the card if the child doesn't get the benefits through SNAP, and the district would have the responsibility to distribute that card. This shouldn't be the rule, but exceptional cases only in the event that, all other options have been exhausted to try and get a hold of an address for the student. As Bridget had mentioned, we are going to be doing corrections. So if we've already funded for August and September, and you have been contacted that those benefits or realize that those benefits were incorrect, not enough days were submitted, you can resubmit for August and September or any other month as far as that goes. So on the example on the slide, if you gave 5 days to a student in August, September, but it really should have been 15, what we're asking is that in the correction file, or if you're submitting it on this February 2nd deadline, please put the 15 in the column for August, September, and on the back end of the system, we will do the subtraction so that they receive the additional 10 days of funding for that particular month. So corrections can, and if you miss a student, you can also submit that student at that time. On the portal, one of the features that we have available, if you log in using the secure link that was sent to the school, there is an area where you can see previously viewed P-EBT funds. And if you go into, for example, the August, September, you will see the students that were funded and the number of days that they were funded. If somebody were to contact support and we don't find that they were funded and we send them to the district can look at that to see if the student is actually on that file. We sent messaging to EMIS coordinators, food service directors, and superintendents. And within that message, there is a secure link. That secure link is at ohio-k12.help P-EBT portal. If you hover over that link in your message, it will have a lot of extra characters on it. That is actually the unique identifier for the district. You can go to the P-EBT portal, as you see written on the screen, and from that portal, you can actually download the template. And that is the same template that we're going to use from now until the end of June. So you will see that all of the months are there to finish out the remainder of the school year. There is a field for building IRN as well as district IRN. If you are a community school or a non-public school, those two fields can be the same IRN number, and that is acceptable. With the template on that portal, there's also a data dictionary that tells you the format for each of the fields, as well as the field length that we are allowing to be submitted. After you submit your file and the file gets processed, an email will be sent to the person who submitted it, and it will contain a load submission report. The image that's on the screen is just an example of 4 of the issues that we are actually watching for. The ones that need to be corrected are the ones that have a severity of fatal. If it is a fatal error, the student will not be processed to receive P-EBT benefits. Informational and warning, you don't have to do anything with, but we want you to be aware. There is also a document on the portal that explains all of the different issues that come back as possibilities on this data submission report as well. So those are just 4 of them that are possible. There are others. One of the common questions that we're getting are for the address greater than 19 characters for schools that have already submitted. It doesn't stop the student from being submitted. What we find is that if the apartment number is after 19 characters, it may get dropped off. So if you have an address and the apartment number's at the end, it delays the processing to get that card to the student, or it may be undeliverable and returned to JFS. If there is a way to shorten some of those addresses up and still make sense to the Postal Service, you are encouraged to do so, but you are not required to do so. The report itself, we email it out to whoever submitted, as well as it is available on the portal, and it will be there. So every time you submit, you will get a new report. So going forward to plan for the rest of our year, the February 2nd deadline, which is for August, September, October, November, and December, is coming up on Tuesday, and that is all of the deadlines are end of day, 11:59 p.m. March 11th is when you'll submit January, February. April 8th for any corrections, and that can go all the way back to August. If you find that there's something that needs corrected in August, you can still submit that. On May 13th, you'll submit March and April, and in July, May, and June. If you look at the calendar after the February 2nd, we've stuck with the 2nd Thursday of the month as the deadlines. We wanted to keep that as consistent as possible to help schools and districts plan for when those upcoming data collections were going to be occurring. If you get a report back, or if you have questions about your data, you're welcome to send an email to PEBT-support@ohio-k12.help. There's also a form on the portal page that you can fill in, and it will create a support request, and we will get back with you via email and work with you to get those problems resolved.
Okay, Missy, we've got quite a few questions for you. The first question that I see is, it says that the person feels that if they added option 23 students, or those up to grade age 22 students, it will give a fatal error of being over age 19. Can you talk about the age parameters that are going to be available for this file?
So it's not a fatal error if it's over age 19, but it will come back as a warning. And if that screenshot showed that as a fatal, we have corrected that since, and I apologize. But that is actually going to be a warning that will come back. And the reason we have that as a warning is really just to confirm that there's not a typo in the date of birth for the year, because the year is what they use if they get a card to actually activate the card. So we just want to alert districts if we see that, again, just to make sure that it's not a typographical error for the date of birth.
Okay. And then it asks, if you have to correct data and resubmit, do you submit the entire file or just the corrected kids?
Excellent question. We will accept either. You can submit just your corrections, or you can submit the entire file. Depending on the size of your district, whatever is most convenient for you.
Okay. Okay, let's see here. If a student withdrew before school started but is on our list, is it okay to delete them off our report?
Yes, if you don't have any days to report for a student, you can choose to delete them or choose to just leave those months blank or put zeros in there. Any of those are acceptable.
Okay. And what time frame is it for getting the data submission back?
So yesterday we did have a large urban that submitted. It did kind of slow down those data submission reports a little bit by the time it got processed. Typically it's within 30 to 60 minutes that you should receive that email, possibly less depending on what's getting submitted. I will say as we get closer to the deadline that more loads are going to be going in, and it will be a little bit, it will slow down. The report, if you haven't received an email, you can go back to the portal and look for that report if you've gone through the secure link. And you may be able to find the report there before the email actually arrives to you. So I encourage you to go back there after you've submitted as well.
What if a student transferred buildings within a district? Do you just want to record one building, the most recent building IRN, and count of all days in the district?
Yes, your scenario you gave is exactly what I've been recommending. If they've moved and they're still within your district, just use the most current building IRN, and then the total days for the whole district.
Okay. If somebody clicks on the secure link and it doesn't take them to the right page or there's no instructions, what should they do?
So the secure link will actually take you to just the portal. Once you're at the portal, you would click on data management. If you get a message that says you are not authenticated, that means your login didn't work. Reach out to us at P-EBT support, the email that's currently on your screen, and we will work with you to get that corrected and get that data in.
Okay. For students that attend half day at a career center and half day at a homeschool, who should include them?
Excellent question. We honestly, it does not matter which one includes them. We want to make sure that they're included. So in that situation, I encourage the two organizations to talk to decide who's going to submit. But as long as they're submitted under one of those, that'll be fine. What will be a problem is if both would submit, that student would show up as a duplicate. And if the days don't match, it'll cause some extra, could cause a delay in processing. So it doesn't matter which one submits, just as long as we get the child in.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit more about addresses? If they don't have an address for a child, or if a child, for example, is placed at a group home, do they use the district address or the social worker agency?
So that's going to be an individual district decision or school decision. You can use the district address, and the district would then be responsible to get the card to that child or the child's caregivers. If you choose to use the caseworker's address, that is also acceptable. It's a local decision as to how you want to handle those students that may be in a group home or that you don't have or homeless, don't have a residential address for.
Okay. And can you speak again about how to find the template spreadsheet for submission?
Sure. So, Bridget, if you go up one slide.
Sure.
Sorry, 2 slides. Okay, maybe 3. I know we had it in there. I just forget which one it was on. Okay, if you go to that URL, after you go to that URL, you would click on data management. And at that point, there's a downloadable link for the template, also the data dictionary. There is also a link that explains any of the errors, warnings, and informational things that may come back in the data report.
Okay. And maybe just verify one more time that people do not have to delete values for August, September. What do they include in their data submission?
Correct. So you can have values for August, September. I actually encourage you to have values for August, September, even if you did submit then. What we will do is we will run a check against the number of days for that student. If the number of days submitted now is greater than what was submitted in August, September, we'll find the difference and get them the additional benefits. If the student wasn't submitted at all for August, September, obviously they would then receive the benefits for August, September. So you do not need to clear out any previous months. When we do the March report or the March data collection, that will include January and February. If you are a smaller school, you don't have a lot of students moving in and out, you could use the same file that you have already loaded this month and just add those last two months to it and leave all of the values the same if there's no change to those. So those don't need cleared out for previous months.
Okay, great. Thanks, Missy. Awesome information that you shared with us today. Betsy, I think that you and I have maybe the next set of questions that are going to be coming up, and the ODE school meal staff has been kind of watching the chat to see what questions. I have seen a question jump up a couple of times that Betsy, I'll go ahead and take. The question is what if the preschool program is operated under the CACFP and not the NSLP? So you're only going to include preschool if it actually would have been on the NSLP or the school breakfast program had the pandemic not occurred. You're not going to include the preschool right now if they would have been on CACFP. And the reason being is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who actually funds this P-EBT program, they are still working on guidance of how the P-EBT will operate with the CACFP. So we're asking districts not to submit that data right now if their preschool students would have been serviced under CACFP. We'll have additional guidance that will come out about that once that actually is released. Okay. All right, so my ODE colleagues, what questions have we been gathering?
Hi, Bridget, it's Brian. I will throw out the first question that came up a few different times in a few different ways. And the basic question is, if the school knows about a student's eligibility status changing during the year, how should they treat that? Is the student's new eligibility status applied retroactively to August? Do they start from the date at which they knew the eligibility status changed? How should they treat those mid-year changes?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the Q&A that we have available talks about how children can be approved for free and reduced status. And it says that you can use either 2021 eligibility information or you can use 1920. If there is 2021 eligibility information, either an application or a direct certification, that's the information that should be used first. So if a child was approved for free and reduced benefits in 1920, and then a household submits an application for benefits in 2021, but the household no longer qualifies, then the school actually has to go through the process of the denial of the benefits and changing that child to paid. That's a fantastic question, though, if it happens now. And Betsy and I might have to talk about it. My gut reaction would be it would be that benefit level going forward. So, for example, if you have already submitted for a student for August, September benefits, and then you got a new application in November and the child is no longer permitted or no longer eligible for free and reduced benefits, that the application was denied because the income was over income or so forth, you would not have to go back to August and September, and we wouldn't have to recollect that information back from the household. It would just be that point moving forward that the household would not be eligible for the P-EBT.
I agree.
Did you have a thought on that? Yeah.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think something to bring up, so if it's actually the inverse, where you maybe have kindergartners who haven't applied for the free and reduced meals yet because it's just being offered to all, we understand that some families may not know about P-EBT, and then once word gets out, they may be like, oh, how do I get it? And so then they may be submitting their application for the free and reduced lunch. And FNS has acknowledged, they've left a very gray area for this for states, is that we can take the free and reduced lunch applications and take it back to like the first day of your non-standard school schedule. But then they said, but at some point it becomes unreasonable to go all the way back. And we're like, okay, but they haven't given strict, like, it's 30 days, 60 days, whatever. So, and, I think Bridget and I have talked that, like, maybe, like, the first 2 months of P-EBT being out there would be a reasonable time for families to hear about it and then go back to the first day of eligible benefits. But if they find out in May and then they want to apply, you would just start from May, because then that becomes a little more unreasonable. I'm sorry if that provides confusion or creates confusion, but FNS has left this very gray for us and gave no real parameters on when we can keep going back. They just said it has to be reasonable, and kind of gave those examples. Like if we're issuing in February for the first time, getting an application at the beginning of March would be okay, but in May it wouldn't be, to go all the way back to August potentially. So I'm sorry if that's a little confusing, but you can always reach out to Bridget on scenarios, and then she and I can discuss and get back to you on that.
Yep. So the bottom line with that one, though, is at the very least for this February data collection, that any new certifications for 2021 that a child becomes free or reduced, you can go back to the beginning of the school year and submit for August through benefits. We can basically make the assumption they would have been free or reduced at the beginning of the school year had they applied, but in most cases, families didn't apply because they were already getting no-cost meals. Okay.
Thanks, Bridget. I'll toss you another question that has come up a number of times in chat, and it has to do with because a lot of districts are operating, for example, SSO, utilizing full area eligibility under the waivers, and they may not have the ability to get those applications, an updated application status for the 2021 school year. And so the most recent application information that they might have, the most recent eligibility information they may have, is from the 1920 school year. Can you talk a little bit more? I know it was in the slides as well, but how would that be addressed at the school?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, for the free and reduced benefits, we know it's just a very unusual year in that most of our schools have shifted to either a seamless summer option or summer food service program. And so once that happened back in September, we know that a lot of you were not actively collecting applications or doing direct certification and so forth. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to start with your 2021 free and reduced certifications, your direct certifications, applications, and determine who's free and reduced based on those. And then if a household has not applied in 2021 but had an application or was directly certified in 1920, for the purposes of P-EBT, you can carry over that free or reduced status into this particular process in school year 2021 for P-EBT, and they can get the P-EBT benefits. It's just that if you got something in 2021 for the household, you do have to process those applications. And then if the household no longer qualifies, you would have to then make that determination and moving forward, of course. So you can use either 2021 information or 1920 information if nothing was received from the household in school year 2021 for the purposes of free and reduced for P-EBT. That actually reminds me of something I just want to make super clear. Even though schools have moved to seamless summer option or summer food, and the children, of course, all are able to get no-cost meals under those programs, it does not mean all of those children are now free. It just means they're getting no-cost meals. Schools still have to go through the normal process of collecting applications for free and reduced or doing direct certification to determine a child truly is free or reduced. Or like we just mentioned, you can use 1920 information. But I know that will impact your other EMIS reporting and for other purposes in your school. So please know that by moving to seamless summer or summer food, it does not make all of your students free. Just wanted to be super clear about that.
And Bridget, a quick follow-up. One of the most recent questions asked for a clarification about if 1920 they were on the direct cert list, and then for 2021 they are not on the direct cert list. What happens in that situation?
Okay, great question. Yeah. So because you have not received updated either application or direct certification information in 2021, you actually can still, that would be part of the carryover into the next school year. If you had moved to, basically for seamless summer and summer food, the 30-day carryover didn't happen. So you didn't have to drop benefits after the 30 days into the next school year. So that's why all of those certifications are still valid into 2021 or until you get a new application or direct certification. So it would be still fine to provide P-EBT for those families.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Bridget, is that, you know, they're really worried about kindergartners who would not have had that information submitted before in the previous year, or new students into your school who weren't, you know, in the district and approved for it. So they're just trying to make sure that there's a way for students to become eligible who didn't have that opportunity in 2019, 2020.
Okay, Bridget, another question that came up a number of times in the chat, and it deals with students that are doing a partial day at a school, and they may opt in to get a meal outside of their partial day hours. So for example, if they are coming in during the afternoon, but they have the option to go in and get a lunch, and they're going in before what their normal school hours would be. How should that be treated in the P-EBT eligibility?
So, Bridget, this is just my initial reaction, and I may need your input. You may agree or disagree, but I think it may depend on whether it's a like just show up and eat, or if it's a scheduled, yes, these children will show up on these days for the meals. I think, you know, when it's a hit or miss, I think you could say it's not a scheduled meal to be consumed at school. Bridget, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. Really, the P-EBT is not supposed to be for days where the child is at school, offered meals to eat at school. So that would be kind of your normal typical school day, or that they would be scheduled to go through the meal line or be offered meals. If it's a day where there really isn't a structured meal program, and that they could come in and get a meal ahead of time or take one home with them, that to me doesn't seem like a day that would negate P-EBT for them. Because of course, being as not as structured, then not as many free and reduced students will have the ability or advantage to be able to take advantage of that for various reasons. So I think P-EBT would still be appropriate on that day. Okay. Looks like we have about 3 more minutes. Brian, do we have any other questions to handle?
There are actually quite a few questions, and one thing we would like to point out for everybody is I think for any questions we're not able to get to, we will try to answer them and find a way to make those answers available along with the questions that were asked. Understanding that there are over 20 questions, it seems at this point, that we might not be able to get to. There were some questions about, and this might be a question from Management Council, about the template. For example, there's a question about why is it using student names instead of the SSID. Additionally, there was, let me try to find it, a question about when they are updating for August, September. Are they supposed to take out the students that previously got benefits back in August, September if they need to submit a correction? So those might be 2 questions for Management Council.
Sure, not a problem. So anyone who did receive benefits in August, September can still remain in the file. That's fine. That's not a problem. And the question regarding SSID, not all entities that participate use SSID because this is also open for non-public schools and they don't use SSID. So because that isn't standardized across the state, it is for public districts, I understand community schools, but the non-pubs wouldn't have that. So that's why we don't have an SSID in the file.
And one more question for Bridget, and this I think is going to be a question held by a lot of the districts, but somebody put it pretty well, which is basically what type of accuracy are we expecting when it comes to students that may elect remote learning one day and then change their mind and their plans are changing on a week-by-week basis, and how accurate do schools have to be when they are trying to gauge what actual remote days students are utilizing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And what we want to make sure everybody understands is that we know all of you are doing the best you can. And that's what we encourage you to do, is do the best you can with the information that you have available. So if you happen to say that a child is supposed to get 22 days of P-EBT, but they really should have gotten 21. There's no ramifications that are going to come on the school district. That we just ask as much as possible with the information you have that you submit accordingly. The great thing about this round of P-EBT is if you always want to err on the side of caution with like the days that are scheduled, that if a family comes back and says, you know what, my child was quarantined, why in the world didn't you give me these extra days? We have very regular, like every month, we have data collection time frames. So if you do have a situation where you say, yes, this child really should have gotten 5 more days of P-EBT for the month of December, but I only submitted a smaller amount, then in the next data correction round, you will be able to add that extra couple of days to their December count, and they will be able to get the P-EBT. I know that that doesn't necessarily make households very happy, that it's not an immediate turnaround reaction, but at the very least with this ongoing round, that we will have regular collections as opposed to having to wait several months and then recollect information and then recollect information several months down the line. We will have a regular schedule of being able to correct things. So that's actually a good ending point for this P-EBT webinar, is that we understand that this is tricky. Absolutely use your resources that we have said. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to your Ohio Department of Education education program specialist. If you have any data submission questions, we have the P-EBT question. Let me go ahead and get to that email address that you can reach out to. We are here to support you. Let us know how we can be of benefit. As Brian had mentioned, we will try to go back to the chat and cover any questions that we didn't get to. We also will have if all goes well, we will have a copy of the recording of this webinar plus a copy of the PowerPoint presentation available in the secure portal for you to go back and reference at your leisure. So we are at 10 o'clock. We appreciate all of your participation in this webinar. Hopefully you found it very informative. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do to support you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.